Rance, May 1940. Amidst the endless wheat fields of Flanders, a thick pillar of black smoke rises against the horizon, blotting out the summer sun. The harsh clatter of iron tracks on asphalt echoes through the air, a grim herald of Nazi Germany's armored monsters. The Panzer IIIs surge forward, their long cannons leveled, ready to crush everything in their path for the blitzkrieg. And on the opposite side, tucked away by the roadside, hidden behind a low thicket, sits something that doesn't look like a war machine at all. It is laughably small. It's as square as a matchbox. It has no roof, no turret, and not a single formidable cannon to its name. From a distance, it looks more like a motorized garden shed painted in olive drab than a weapon capable of shifting the fate of the world. Its hull is so low that the soldiers inside are exposed from the shoulders up, with nothing to protect them from mortar fragments or the lashing summer rains of Europe. Looking at it, any military expert of the time would have scoffed. What is this toy supposed to do in a war of giants? It has no thick armor. It has no heavy firepower. It looks like an engineering blunder, a relic that was obsolete before it even left the factory floor. And yet, history has a cruel way of mocking those who judge by appearances. Because that tiny, humble, and seemingly weak object was the Universal Carrier, better known by its more familiar nickname, the Bren Gun Carrier. And here is the fact that will stun you. It didn't just survive the most brutal conflict in human history. It became the most produced armored vehicle in the history of the world. With over 113,000 units built, it outpaced legends like the Soviet T-34 and the American M4 Sherman. From the scorching sands of North Africa to the humid jungles of Burma, from the ruined mountain roads of Italy to the vast steppes of the Eastern Front, this tiny vehicle was everywhere. It did the jobs heavy tanks couldn't do, and it endured conditions that made the most complex machines surrender. This is the story of a machine once dismissed as a footnote, which became the indispensable backbone of the Allied forces. To understand why the Universal Carrier was born, we must go back to the mud-clogged trenches of the First World War. It was an era where infantry faced a lethal problem: how to advance across no man's land, when enemy machine gun fire could wipe out an entire battalion in minutes. The British Army realized they needed something positioned between a walking soldier and a massive, lumbering tank. They needed a vehicle that could carry machine guns, ammunition, and communication equipment across terrain where standard trucks would sink axle-deep in mud. The 1920s and 30s were a time of wild experimentation. Engineers at Vickers Armstrong began building tiny tanks called Carden-Loyd tankettes. Initially designed for scouting or towing artillery, the reality of the battlefield demanded more. The Army needed a multi-purpose workhorse, something that could do everything from evacuating the wounded to suppressing enemy strongpoints. Thus, the Universal Carrier was born from a blend of previous designs, with a single goal: cheap, easy to build, and incredibly flexible. If you look at the construction of the Universal Carrier, you see minimalism pushed to the extreme. Its heart is a Ford V8 engine producing 85 horsepower, the same kind of engine you could find in any civilian truck on the streets of London or Detroit at the time. This meant maintenance and repairs were incredibly easy, even for an amateur mechanic. Its suspension was a masterpiece of practicality, using coil springs to absorb shocks on rugged terrain. But the most unique feature was how it steered. Instead of using complex track braking systems like traditional tanks, the Universal Carrier steered by warping its tracks. When the driver turned the steering wheel, a mechanical linkage would shift the displacement of the road wheels, causing the tracks to bow and turning the vehicle smoothly. It was an engineering solution that was both brilliant and simple, reducing mechanical failure and increasing the durability of the drive system. The hull was a simple open box structure of steel plates about 7 to 10 millimeters thick. It was just enough to stop rifle bullets or small fragments. If you stood taller than the vehicle, you could look straight inside and see the entire crew. No turret, no air filtration, no luxury whatsoever. But this open design was a secret advantage. It gave the crew excellent 360-degree visibility, allowing them to spot the enemy before being spotted. And most importantly, it allowed them to bail out of the vehicle instantly if it was hit. When World War II erupted, the Universal Carrier was immediately thrown into the furnace. In France in 1940, while German panzer divisions tore through Allied lines, these tiny carriers served as devoted rearguard protectors. They slipped through narrow trails that tanks couldn't navigate, ferrying ammunition to surrounded units and bringing wounded men to the rear. When the British retreated at Dunkirk, thousands of carriers were left behind, but they had already left their mark of resilience. However, it was in the North African desert that the Universal Carrier truly shone like a star. Amidst the scorching heat and blinding sandstorms, the most complex machines frequently broke down as sand choked their engines. But the Universal Carrier was different. Its Ford V8 engine ran with an uncanny reliability. With a top speed of nearly 50 kilometers per hour on flat ground, it became a nightmare for German and Italian infantry units. British soldiers customized them with relentless creativity. They mounted everything on them: Bren guns, Boys anti-tank rifles, even flamethrowers and mortars. There were times when a single tiny carrier could carry the firepower of an entire platoon, appearing suddenly from behind a dune, unleashing a hail of fire and vanishing into the haze before enemy artillery could even zero in. The magic of the Universal Carrier lay in its limitless adaptability. In the tropical jungles of Burma, where mud and ancient tree roots forced every motorized vehicle to admit defeat, the Universal Carrier trudged forward. Its ground pressure was incredibly low, thanks to its wide tracks relative to its light weight, allowing it to glide over mud without sinking. Australian and New Zealand troops used them to tow howitzers through impossible terrain, providing vital fire support for infantry in bloody close-quarters battles. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union received thousands of carriers through the Lend-Lease program. Red Army soldiers initially looked at it with suspicion, but they quickly grew to love it for its performance in the harsh winter and its high mobility over snowy fields. They called it Vanyushka and used it to lead rapid flanking counterattacks against the Germans. Compare the Universal Carrier to its famous cousin, the American M3 half-track. The M3 was larger, carried more troops, and had more firepower. But the M3 was also bulky, thirsty for fuel, and a massive target for artillery. The Universal Carrier was the opposite. It was so small it could hide behind a bush or a low wall. It consumed very little gasoline and could be easily transported by ship or even slung under the belly of early helicopters. While a German Tiger tank required a team of highly skilled technicians and complex spare parts, a Universal Carrier could be fixed by any soldier who knew how to hold a wrench. In a war of attrition and resources, the winner isn't the one with the strongest weapon, but the one whose weapon can show up everywhere it's needed. The Universal Carrier was the embodiment of that philosophy. It wasn't a wonder weapon, it was a blue-collar worker of war. Its production numbers were a resounding testament to its success. From factories in the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, carriers poured out like a flood. Its popularity was so great that it became a common language of the Allied armies. A Canadian soldier could jump into an Indian Army carrier and operate it instantly without instruction. It served in every role imaginable: command vehicle, telephone cable layer, armored ambulance, ammunition carrier, and even a platform for primitive rocket launchers. Specialized versions like the Wasp were equipped with flamethrowers, turning the tiny vehicle into a roaring nightmare for fortified bunkers. Regardless of the variant, it retained its core value: reliability. When everything else broke, when ammo ran low, when the path ahead was dark, the familiar hum of the V8 engine from a Carrier was always a beacon of hope for exhausted infantrymen. When the war ended, while the legendary Panther or Tiger tanks were now mostly scrap metal or museum pieces, the Universal Carrier continued its journey. Many nations kept them in service for decades. In developing countries, they were converted into farm tractors, fire engines, or cargo haulers in remote areas. Its design directly influenced the development of modern armored personnel carriers, APCs. Vehicles like the M113 or the FV432 carry the DNA of the Universal Carrier, a steel box on tracks, simple and multifunctional. Its longevity proved an ironclad truth in military engineering. Complexity is the enemy of effectiveness. No matter how modern a machine is, if it cannot operate in extreme conditions or is too difficult to mass produce, it will fail against something that looks outdated but is always ready to fight. Looking back, the Universal Carrier teaches us a profound lesson in humility and practicality. In a world constantly racing after flashy technology and impressive specs, we often forget the value of simplicity. The Universal Carrier didn't have a threatening look. It had no long-range destructive power. It even looked vulnerable. But it was because of that weakness that it forced its operators to be more creative, more daring, and more flexible. It didn't try to be a fierce tiger. It chose to be a diligent ant, present in every corner, carrying burdens many times its own weight. It stands as proof that in the chaos of war, the most important thing isn't the weapon you have, but how you use what you have to survive and win. Never underestimate something just because it doesn't look impressive, because sometimes the quietest, simplest machines are the ones that change the course of history. The Universal Carrier, the tiny, armored vehicle with a giant heart, proved that endurance beats flash, and reality will always defeat the illusion of power. As the final echoes of World War II fade into the past, its low silhouette on the roads of war will forever be remembered as a symbol of absolute practicality. A machine born of desperate need, forged through hardship, and turned into a legend by its own simplicity. It wasn't just an armored vehicle. It was a lesson that sometimes, ultimate simplicity is the most terrifying strength on the battlefield.